So welcome to the college lecture series, the first of this semester. Um, so today's presentation is titled Combating Loneliness, Intergenerational Experiential Education as an Effective Means of Fostering Connectivity. And today's presentation is by Mary Beth Meacham. A little bit about Mary Beth. MB Mary Beth Meacham holds undergraduate degrees in the biological and human developmental sciences, MPH with a primary concentration in human nutrition, a certificate in plant-based nutrition from Cornell, and is completing her dissertation for her PhD, focusing her research on interpreting the experiences of rural residents in public health education. Mary Beth is an adjunct professor of human nutrition, public health, and biology. She also works for Cornell University Cooperative Extension as a research educator. We are so glad and pleased that Mary Beth has voluntarily agreed to present for the college lecture series. Mary Beth, please.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen to me talk today. So just before I get going, something about whenever I present a lecture, I hate whenever I have to stare at a screen and people are talking and I don't get to do anything to interact with them. So if you are willing, what I would ask of you is that there will be two segments in particular during this presentation where you'll have the option to either speak if you're brave enough to do so, or to put things in the chat box, because I would like to be able to hear from you a little bit of what you've experienced, and that will tie into the presentation. So with that being said, so the title today, if my screen will cooperate, here we go, is Combating Loneliness, Intergenerational Experiential Education as effective means of fostering connectivity. Apparently I like really long and complex titles. But what we'll be talking about today is not going to be long or complex or hopefully very dull. We're going to be talking about simple and practical ways where each of us, regardless of in what venue we work, can help to bring about connectivity in the community. And as you can see from this picture right here, it might not be through things that are necessarily classroom-based, although that can be a component of it. It can also be things that are more fun. So the outline for what we'll be talking about today: introduction, which I'll be getting into just a second. Question time, because of course we need to talk together. I'm going to go through the background and the need, because of course we know that loneliness is a problem, but I think it's helpful to look at some statistics for that. I'm looking at the methods of what we used here on site to implement this program, some initial feedback, and then plot twist COVID. I don't think any of us were expecting the way that the world has shaped the last year to be the way it has, but how can we still foster connectivity even though we are obviously not able to connect like we would normally in person? Then we're going to talk a little about innovation. How can you take what we talked about today and integrate that in your own life? And then a wrap up. So here you can see one picture of a whole bunch of people cooking bread on a stick. What I do for Cornell Cooperative Extension, which is my primary job, is I'm a resource educator, and my work focuses on nutrition and on healthy living. And one of my favorite things to do is to bring people around food, because food is something that can act as a glue to bring people together. Everyone likes food, and when you add fire into the mix, it just makes it more fun. So you'll be seeing a theme of food and fire throughout this presentation. All right, so starting off with question time. Think about the people with whom you have meaningfully connected throughout your life. And I'm meaning friendships or even family relationships. I'm not meaning romantic relationships, but the other connections. What commonalities were there, whether they were activities, preferences, ages, fostered those connections? Examples are welcome. So if you are brave enough, going back, can you please either put that into the chat box or unmute yourself briefly and then just give examples? And again, we're not going to take a ton of time on this, but I'd be very interested to hear what any of you have to say on this topic.
Hi, this is Sharon Hancock, my grandmother.
All right, and why?
She showed unconditional love and always was just never criticized. She was just always just surrounded herself. Her epitome, just being in your presence, made you feel welcome and loved. So I guess her character.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That was an excellent example. Anyone else? And if things are going in the chat box, I can't see it. So if somebody could please read what's in the chat, I would appreciate it.
I have an example. This is Krista Rivera. One of my good friends and I, we can kind of exist in silence together without feeling discomfort. So that was a sign that we have a strong connection.
Perfect. I love that. Sometimes when we are with other people, that we try to fill that awkward silence with anything. And the fact that you were able to connect with somebody and words were not needed, that's powerful. Any others? Thank you for that.
Sure, this is Bonnie Winchester. I can read the ones in the chat. It says, Rihanna says, I tend to make friends that have children who are the same age. And Rachel says, I enjoyed bonding with my grandmother over our shared love of family, pets, and infants. And then just as I was reading it, Jen typed, she likes non-judgmental, open-ended, and accepting friendships or moments with her aunt. And they enjoy talking every couple days.
Perfect. Thank you very much for being willing to do that. So excellent job. So anyone else? Okay.
I was going to say athletics and working out, sports, people who like to do the same kayaking or jogging and stuff. Those kinds of people I bond with as well.
Perfect. Excellent
Yep.
examples. Thank you. All right. Last call.
Hi, this is Adriana Umaña, and I travel, exploring new places with my sister. Travel was one of the ways we bonded, being in unknown places together.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Thank you all very much for sharing that. All of those examples were perfect. There was a connection that you made with another person. Sometimes that's based around a common activity that you like to do together. Sometimes that connection is more to do with how that person made you feel. But usually when we're talking about human connection, both of those aspects kind of come into play. We're not going to connect with people with whom we feel that there's a lack of care. We're not going to necessarily connect with people with there's nothing that we have in common. So this is a picture of my grandma. And I'm so glad that the first example that was made was of a grandmother relationship. This is the last time I saw my grandma. She ended up having dementia at the later stages of her life. And when I went to visit her for what would be the last time, she had no idea who I was. I went with my sister. She didn't know who my sister was, and that was difficult for us because my grandmother was the best human being I've ever encountered in my life. She always made people feel loved. And as I was saying goodbye to her, I asked her if I could hug her because I didn't know that if she would welcome a hug from somebody she didn't know. She grabbed my arm and whispered in my ear that she would always love me. And that was very, very powerful, not just because I love my grandma, but because of the role my grandma had in my life. So grandma looks very frail, and at this stage in her life she was, but when she was younger, she was a firecracker. My grandmother was shorter than 5 feet tall, and yet she had a lead foot. She lived right outside of Boston, and if anyone has ever driven in Boston, they know that Boston traffic can be rather ruthless. And I will say with absolute certainty that my grandma was the most ruthless of them all. She would fly down the highway, and by the term fly, I mean she would regularly go 100 miles an hour or faster. She would have this little tiny car that her little tiny body was packed into. She often had to sit on things to be able to stand up or sit up high enough to see over the dashboard. And she would weave her little tiny car in and out of traffic. And when I was riding with her, she'd cover the dashboard occasionally and tell me not to look at the dashboard. She also never got one speeding ticket in her life because whenever the cops pulled her over, she did this sweet little old lady shtick and managed to sweet talk her way out of getting a parking ticket or a speeding ticket. Now, that's not necessarily something that I should learn, but grandma also taught me many other things. My family lived with my grandparents for a number of years, and those were, I think, the best years of my childhood. Grandma taught me how to cook. Now, my mom also taught me how to cook, and there were a lot of people who cooked in my family, but there was something about doing that with grandma. Grandma tried to teach me how to sew, although that was an abject failure. I cannot sew at all very well. I can sew up skin, but not so much anything with any cloth. Grandma also taught me how to lose. She loved to play board games with us, and she would kick my rear end in Parcheesi on a very regular basis. I do not like to lose. I don't think I still like to lose, but grandma made sure that I learned how to lose. All of these things happen seamlessly, seeming effortlessly with my grandma, because grandma knew something that she tried to pass on to us. And that is people matter. That simple concept that people matter, that if you show somebody, indicate to them that they have value, they will be more willing to connect with you. And that's not necessarily a strategy that you go into thinking, I want something out of this relationship. But grandma would show attention and value to each and every person with whom she connected. She would make sure that the person was placed first in the value, and then whatever else she was doing with them, whether it was an activity or whether it was teaching them, that came second. Grandma was a nurse by vocation, and she was one of the most popular nurses the hospital had because of that care factor, that showing people that they mattered more than anything else. Grandma also was not a lonely person because she had friends of all ages. When she and my grandparents were in their 80s, they would have homeschooling kiddos come over to the house. My grandfather was an electrical engineer, and he would do all sorts of experiments with the kids. Grandma would do baking and play board games and sew and all of that stuff with the kids. So they were constantly involved in other people's lives. She, again, had that idea of you first make that connection with people, and then everything else will come after that. The second thing that grandma always insisted on was that connection needs to happen around an activity, some sort of commonality. So she would do things with people in order to connect with them. So show them that they had value, but then also play a board game or be willing to go on a trip. Some of my best road trips were with grandma, and not just because it was awesome to see her get out of speeding tickets, but because we had so much fun hanging out together. I would go with my 80-something-year-old grandma and 90-something-year-old great aunt, and we would have an absolute blast. So whenever I have conducted any sort of classroom activities, whenever I have taught, whether it's in person or in a classroom, I've always tried to take those two ideas. First and foremost, making sure that people know that they matter most. And secondly, having activities that people can come around with together. So I have a public health background, and when I talk about public health, we have things that are called social determinants of health. And basically, social determinants are characteristics that determine how healthy people will be. Now, one of those social determinants of health are with conditions for social and community. So thinking about the fact that it's not just, okay, well, I have tainted water and I might get sick, but also the communities in which we live tend to shape how we interact with each other. Now, if you think about rural communities from several generations ago, they were usually characterized by people having connections with each other. The communities were small, tight-knit. Somebody sneezes, the next day their neighbor from a mile away asks how their cold is, because rural communities, what do? You talk. That's not necessarily the case anymore. Everyone's kind of gone into their own little world between screen time and just busy schedules. It doesn't really matter whether we're rural or urban or suburban. We all tend to have our own little disconnected lives. And as a result, loneliness has become extraordinarily prevalent. It's one of the areas of public health concern. So when we look at the issues and the fact, we see that around a third of all residents of industrialized countries are lonely. About 1 in 12 are acutely lonely. And that is associated with a 26% increase in premature mortality. So this not only affects people's emotions, it also affects their physical health as well, since our emotions and our bodies and our mind are all interconnected. These have not been any associated with any subset of the population, meaning it's not only people who have disabilities or who are older, but it can be found among cross sections of the entire population. You will find loneliness in youth, you'll find it in teenagers, you'll find it in young adults, you'll find it in middle-aged adults, and in senior citizens. And to make it even more complex, the percentages of lonely people have been increasing. So again, this is an area of public health concern, and this was prior to COVID. So some more facts. Loneliness is experienced at all ages. Again, as we just talked about, it does not have to be relegated just to senior citizens, although they do tend to be more lonely, as we see in that next bullet point. Because senior citizens are not necessarily as physically active as they were when they were younger, because they might be retired, and especially if they live in a rural region, they are not able to access a lot of the resources that might be easily accessible by somebody who lives in an urban or suburban region. So social isolation exacerbates the issues of loneliness with senior populations. And as we discussed earlier, it's not just an emotional issue, and not just in quotes, because of course emotion is a huge component of what drives us. But there are significant correlations between loneliness, and again, especially in senior populations, and long-term adverse effects on mental and physical health. So things like depression, anxiety, dementia, schizophrenia, cardiovascular diseases, and also susceptibility to infectious disease all can result from loneliness. Now, Grandma did have dementia when she was older. She passed away in her early 90s, and she was extremely active up until she developed dementia. I have a picture of her at home on my refrigerator. On her 90th birthday, she went to have her driver's license test, because Grandma liked people. Grandma wanted to be around people, so Grandma made sure that she drove to be able to be with people. So when she was 90, she went to the DMV and she passed to her test to be able to keep her driver's license. All right. She stayed active, and when she did decline, that decline was very, very, very rapid. So again, when we're socially connected, when we're plugged into community, we tend to be healthier overall. One of the things that I do for Extension is education, whether it is virtually, unfortunately now that's kind of the way things are, but usually it's in person. And I'm lucky because I get to go pretty much everywhere. I refer to myself as the cockroach of Extension, because I will go anywhere and to be able to offer programs. So sometimes I'm in schools, sometimes I'm in senior centers, sometimes I'm in community organizations, sometimes I'm presenting at national conferences. So what I get to do is very diverse, and it's a lot of fun. However, I love this picture because this was taken by one of my dietetic interns. And I had gone to a facility to present education on healthy snacks. Now, when I got there, my intern, who was from China, made an observation later. She said that every single person that was there attending that presentation was on their phone, head down, completely focused on their phone. They were not talking. Now, not to stereotype or anything, but older ladies like to gab. Ladies in general, we like to gab. We're all about connection and talking and being able to make sure that we're able to connect with each other by our words. But this group, no, they were all on their phones. And my intern found it very interesting because she said in China, where she lives, that everyone likes to be around people. They don't like to be by themselves. However, they'll be with a huge group of people, but they'll all be on their cell phones also, and that they won't actually be socially connected with each other. She thought it was very interesting that here in a different population from a different country, the same exact thing was happening. So when I go and I start presenting at these places and people are stuck on their phones, I make that stop. Not by telling them to put their phones away, but by getting them involved. So with this group, I divided the ladies into teams and then had each team perform as a part of a challenge to come up with a number of different vegetables or fruits. So how many different vegetables or fruits we could come up with. And because it was a challenge and there was teamwork, the ladies started talking together. Their phones went away. And when they started talking to each other, the groups started talking across the table. They ended up by this point, having fun. They were eating snacks, they were discussing with me, they were discussing with each other. And then by the time that they left, not one of them went back to the phone. They all were talking with each other up until they were kicked out of the facility for the end of the program. All right, so with that being said, what strategy are we employing? So if we note that there are benefits in individuals of all ages engaging in regular physical activity and in learning new skills, that will benefit, again, the physical, mental, and emotional aspects of us. So things that I have tried to use whenever I plan these strategies for work. So first of all, don't just bring people together, bring them around something together. So whether it's an activity, whether it's an event, whether it's a type of food, make sure that there's some commonality that people can all rally around. Second thing is have them learn new skills and information in a hands-on manner. I am a huge fan of experiential education. I think that the more that people can do with their hands, the better chance they have of learning that. And that's one thing I've really loved working as an adjunct biology instructor for SUNY Adirondack is lab time, because when it's lab time, people are learning on a hands-on manner. But instead of just being lab time, I also try to incorporate that into classroom time. So for example, one thing that I might do is cell organelle charades. So while we're learning about the cell organelle, not just talking about what they are and how they function in the cell, but having students break into groups, and then each of them have to act out one of the organelles. And then the other students have to guess what they were, that group was acting out. And then when they also act that out, they also have to teach back to the rest of the students and tell them, you know, this is what the organelle is, this is where it's located, this is what the function is. But that's after they have done something together as a group that is hands-on. And when that happens, there seems to be more fun, there's more synergy. These students end up engaging with each other better, and they engage with me better, which makes for a more positive learning environment. Also, give participants the opportunity to attend events with family members and friends. One thing I've noticed is that there are a lot of people who don't want to go to something unless they already know somebody who's there. So they'll end up dragging somebody along, and then they end up having fun together. Teamwork. We talked earlier about the fact that I had the groups break into small teams, and then also I have students work in small groups occasionally. That allows for, it almost forces them to talk to each other. And when it forces them to talk to each other, you'll end up finding that that group talks again after that, every time they meet. So again, it just fosters a synergy. Reduce barriers. There are enough barriers that exist. So whenever I offer any opportunities for people to try to bring together, I try to identify barriers and then remove them to the best of my ability. So whether that's cost, making most of these things, educational opportunities, either very low cost or free, transportation, some of the things we'll be talking about in a few minutes, or people had to go somewhere for one of these programs, making sure that they're easily accessible, especially if people have physical disabilities. Are they wheelchair accessible? Are they easily able to be reached if people don't have a lot of money and can't spend extra money on gas or transportation? And then also materials. Again, as any instructor knows, the playing ground is not level for students or for anyone to be able to have the same access to materials. So using things that are very inexpensive and that most people would have lying around the home. And then learn by doing. I'm a huge fan of that as well. Have participants help to teach each other. I can teach, and I'm sure all of you can because this is a faculty lecture. However, when students take the ownership to teach each other, they're learning it, because if you teach something, you have to know what you're talking about, at least hopefully. But they're also going to be more engaged with each other, and that teach back opportunity gives them a chance to shine. So for the requirements for these programs, experiential education, of course, hands-on, accessibility, and creativity, the sky is the limit. So what I do in extension is usually with food sustainability emphasis, teaching people how to grow their own food, how to preserve their own food, how to cook their own food. All of these basic skills that help people access a healthier lifestyle. So even if they have limited incomes, they can still enjoy good health. Physical activity, again, it's not just what you put in your body, it's also what you do with your body. And then positive health. So huge component about like mindful eating and reducing food shame and social connectivity. So if these are the areas that I normally work in for my job at Cornell, what then can I do to foster connectivity? So the methods that I chose for this program were gardening, food preservation, hikes, outdoor cooking, snowshoeing, and then just regular cooking. So all of these things are activities that people of all ages can enjoy. They're also activities where there might be a few limitations as far as disabilities are concerned, but most people with disabilities can still enjoy and engage in most of these activities. So first one being gardening. Extension is known for master gardeners and for ag, usually. We have educational gardens here on site at our workplace, and they have been absolutely fantastic to allow people of all ages and backgrounds to learn how to grow their own food. So whether you want to grow something that's ornamental, or my preference, grow something that you can then use for food, people of all ages can work together and learn how to grow things. So in this picture, you see Elise Stefanik from several years ago when she came and toured the facility. So our gardens here at work don't only just give people the opportunity to learn how to grow vegetables, it also is something that we can do to give back to the community. So we donate our produce. This past year, we donated over 170 pounds of produce out of a very small garden area. But we also, again, have the opportunity to teach those skills to people of all ages and all backgrounds. Cooking and eating. Again, food is the best way, I believe, to bring people together. And I know I'm slightly biased, but if you have any sort of food, I try to think of my programs as the kitchen environment. So when we live with my grandparents and when I was growing up, or even now in my own home, the kitchen's kind of the hub of the house, right? Everyone comes into the kitchen and hangs out and eats. And, you know, when somebody's cooking, other people sometimes may or may not give some helpful hints or unhelpful hints. But when there's food, it can bring people around. So teaching people how to cook, teaching them that food can taste good. I expose people to new foods. So if I'll go into elementary schools and I bring in my interns, we'll cook and make things together. Or we will go and have families cook food together and then eat it. We've also done intergenerational virtual cooking events, which I will get into in just a minute. Food preservation, again, these are all skills that, again, gardening, you think of, is that a practical skill? Absolutely. Cooking, is that a practical skill? Absolutely. Food preservation, one of the biggest topics that's being discussed right now in the field of public health and really for nonprofits in general is the idea of food insecurity. With COVID and reduction in income for many families, access to good, healthy food is somewhat limited. Therefore, skills like food preservation can be very helpful. If you do have access to an excess of bounty in the summer, don't just throw it away if it goes to waste. Why not preserve it? So getting people of all ages and all backgrounds together and teaching them hot water bath canning of tomato sauce, which is what that is, or how to make jams or jelly, even if it goes into the freezer. These basic skills that are benefiting the person as far as the knowledge, but also giving them an opportunity to connect with each other. Outdoor cooking. Again, I mentioned earlier, I love food, I love fire, so it's the perfect fusion. And whenever you get people together around a fire pit, magic happens. So here on the left-hand side, you see one of the 4-H kiddos who's been part of our program on one of the 4-H camping trips. We cooked everything over the fire. On the right-hand side, you see this is Dr. Wendy Wolf, who is the head of the Division of Nutritional Sciences at Cornell University. And she was absolutely delighted to take a bit of dough, wrap it around a stick, and cook it over some coals. Sounds really simple, and it is really simple, but it's absolutely delicious. And shameless plug, as part of my work here for Extension, I wrote an outdoor cooking curriculum that's geared toward families. It's very simple, but it has leave no trace information, how to build a fire, and it has a whole bunch of recipes, including ones that are vegan, vegetarian, and gluten-free. So if anyone would like that, I'll give my contact information at the end. Email me, and I'd be happy to email you a free PDF. But that curriculum is something that enables people to, again, cook together and come together with fire, good things. I am really, 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 really proud of this group. We do intergenerational hikes, usually this past year, obviously not so much, but getting people of all ages together and hiking. And one of the things that I teach with Extension is wild edibles. So when we go on these hikes, we not only point out different aspects of wildlife, but I can also say, oh, this is plantain. And this is safely edible. These are the parts of it that you'd use. This is how you'd prepare it. This is when you'd harvest it. Also, it gives different people opportunities to share what they know. So if there's a kid who sees a squirrel and they want to point it out, they can. And also you get this fostering of encouragement, especially if the hike, and this group right here, one of my absolute favorites, we did the Chester Challenge 2 years ago. It's a group of hikes that are up in Chestertown. And if you notice, the people are all ages. So we had some kids, some middle-aged adults, some young adults, and some senior citizens. And although one of the senior citizens was swearing at me prolifically because they said that they would never ever listen to me again when I said a hike was easy, they completed all of these hikes together. And it was neat because the kids were encouraging the senior citizens and the senior citizens were encouraging the kids. And that magic of that connectivity is exactly what you want to see. Snowshoeing. Here in New York, we have snow more of the year than not. So thinking, okay, if we can't hike together, why not snowshoe together? So we've done intergenerational snowshoes. Same basic premise, snowshoeing is a way to get some activity, get people involved in talking, and especially in the winter when you're holed up in your home, you want to be able to get out and connect with people. Snowshoes are relatively inexpensive unless you get the mountaineering ones. And again, it's just a way that's low impact. These are the Dean Museum trails in Stony Creek. One side of the trails are wheelchair accessible when there's no snow, but it's fairly flat. So again, thinking of ways to get people together, get them talking, you bring in some hot chocolate and some snacks, and it's a fantastic time. And of course, enjoying food. And this right here is my kiddo. This was taken a number of years ago here at Extension as part of our youth fair that we hold every year with our 4-Hers. And I love the pie eating contest. My son did win it that year, proud mom moment. But it's nice to be able to see the 4-H kids and their families involved in activities together, and just that magic of, again, the different generations that are working together and enjoying the same activities. All right, so we've talked about all of these things that I love to do in person. What on earth do you do with COVID? So as you can see from this picture, this one wasn't entirely thought through perfectly. I decided to start doing cooking parties this past summer. Had heard that they were being offered at some other places and figured why not make it an effort at least. So I would come up with an easy recipe. People could join via Zoom and we would make food together in real time. So although here at my office, we do have a kitchen in the back, at that particular day, the kitchen was not accessible. So what do you do when that happens? You make salsa in your office. So I started off by, again, just showing people what I was doing, and they had the recipe ahead of time if they wanted to join along. And for that particular one, everyone did, and we all made salsa fresca together, and it was absolutely amazing. So after that, though, thankfully, I did get access to the kitchen, so I could do things like making pickles. So not, these were refrigerator pickles. I didn't get too in depth with any sort of food preservation. But again, these cooking parties, allowing people from wherever they are, whether it's at their home or a community organization, they can either watch or they can cook with me. They get the recipe ahead of time. And I have to say, I absolutely love these because I will see little tiny kids and I will see senior citizens, people of all ages and all backgrounds, and they're all excited to be able to cook things together. And again, fostering that kitchen idea where everyone gets together around food and conversation happens. So you'll see one little kid holding something that he made up to the screen and asking what I think of it. And then somebody else will chime in and tell that kid that they're doing an awesome job and that whatever they cook looks amazing. Or somebody else, okay, I made this dough. Does this look right? And I'm like, okay, poke it. And then everyone's like, yay, congratulations, because you just made amazing dough. So again, thinking we can't necessarily get together in person, but when these different generations get together over Zoom and cook together and show off what each other are doing, magic happens. So some of the feedback that we've had, I like that the hiking trails weren't too long or hard. I also like that the older ladies didn't look down on me because I was a young person, but seemed interested in me when we talked. This was from a young adult who had come along for the hiking programs, and they had been very reticent to have this activity be something that they wanted to do. I kind of dragged them into it because they were concerned that the people that they would be encountering that were older than they were, better educated than they were maybe, would be judgmental. And they weren't. the very different thing happened, that person ended up absolutely feeling valued because the other people in the group wanted to know about their life. So instead of having that experience of going and participating in something and being shunned and being isolated, that person now saw that they were valued by other people, and they actually went to the rest of those activities willingly. I did not have to drag them. Never snowshoed before, even though I lived in the mountains my entire life. I'm snowshoeing all winter long now and have talked some other girlfriends into joining me. This is one of the other groups. So that group of core group of ladies, it was one senior center, and then we had 4-H youth, and then other people with those intergenerational hikes. And then that was in 2019. And then that winter, we did intergenerational snowshoe. And I have absolutely loved the fact that a group of those ladies, some of the senior citizens, are still snowshoeing now. They've lived in the mountains their entire life. They had never snowshoed, but now they know that they can do it. They know that they like it. So instead of not hanging out with their friends throughout the winter, the ladies get together on a regular basis and they snowshoe. So they're staying physically active, they're staying socially connected, and it's all good. I love that the virtual cooking parties let people make food at home with you and other people and have fun and ask questions, and that little boy was the cutest. There is a 4-year-old little boy that's been attending most of the cooking parties, and he is actually adorable. And he will tell me how much he loves the food or give some comments. But again, seeing kids, adults, senior citizens, people of all backgrounds cooking together, even via a screen, it's amazing to see that connection. All right, so stop from me talking, and now I was going to go back to wanting to hear from you. Discuss ways in which you can apply what you learned today to your own communities or your own classroom or your own life. What are some ways in which you can innovatively implement intergenerational education to socially connect people? All right, 1, 2, 3, go. Has to be a brave person out there, either in the chat box or out loud.
Hello, this is Adriana Humania, and I really appreciated what you mentioned of doing, the fact that it's about doing. I feel like Zoom, when my family tries to do Zoom meetings with the older generation, it gets to be too much of screen time. But if you're each doing things, I think that's the piece that's missing. So that's what I learned, that instead of just gathering and staring at a screen, maybe everyone's doing something and sharing that experience.
Thank you. Excellent. So before we go on to the next comment, one thing that I wanted to refer to with that, one of the senior centers is my favorite senior center, and I'm not going to say which one it is because then I will sound prejudiced. But they and I are working on a program for next month, which we're going to do a virtual intergenerational murder mystery. I've tied it into heart health. We did our first one last year right before COVID happened. So it was heart health lecture, and then we have a murder mystery. It was so much stinking fun. But we're going to be doing that via Zoom. And again, intergenerational. So there are some youth that have volunteered, and they'll be paired up with senior citizens, helping with maybe some technical issues, but also just having fun. So that's another way you could possibly do something with your family, have a virtual murder mystery. My family will play board games over Zoom. And that can be very entertaining. I just got Poetry for Neanderthals and highly recommend it. That has been an absolute blast. So doing things with your family over Zoom, there are 2 ideas. All right, any other ideas?
One of the things that, this is Jivan again, one of the things that my wife and our Nepalese community in the United States during the pandemic, what they did was they would get together every day. They would get together once a week, and over Zoom they would do yoga. And that was very cool that they would do that, and that kind of that community, that sense of community was always there, and that bond that was created was stronger. But I think I like your idea of it was kind of, they were doing it among the same age group. I think it would be a better idea to include some of the younger generations also in there, so that that kind of tradition is continued, and then there is a learning that happens and also that bonding that happens. So I think that's a brilliant idea. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I love the idea of yoga and exercise. That's one thing. My son works out a lot and he does yoga. I'm not that bendy, and it's something I definitely need to start incorporating. So thank you for that encouragement. But he had been encouraging his friends to work out and get in shape prior to COVID. And he did not want them to end up losing that momentum. So he has been working out online with his friends. He will do push-ups and burpees and sit-ups and all sorts of things with his friends and make sure that they still stay in shape. So physical activity is also something that's possible. Thank you very much. Anyone else? All right, so if there is somebody else who wants to jump in and give an example, please absolutely do. But this is a picture of my son. I think this kind of beautifully summarizes another reason of why I love intergenerational education so much, or intergenerational connectivity. So my son has autism, and he is high functioning, but when he was little, he did not understand social boundaries. So everyone was his friend in his mind, and he wanted to go up and hug his friends. And it would break my heart because poor little kid had no clue that what he was doing was not only not socially acceptable, but that other people were not going to respond to him in the way that he wanted. So he wanted to be everyone's friend, wanted to hug them. People, of course, didn't want the strange kid running up and hugging them. When we went to Old Sturbridge Village, when he was, I think, 7 years old, he perseverated on the idea of the blacksmith. I think he had watched an old, some PBS special, I think it was actually Reading Rainbow, ironically enough, where they went and toured Old Sturbridge Village, and my son was just absolutely taken with the idea of blacksmithing. So my thought, being a mom, is 7-year-old son, autistic son, blacksmithing, not a good mix. So I tried to distract him for the entire day as we went through the entire facility, and my son kept on reminding me, I want to go back, I want to see the blacksmith. So finally I relented and we went to see the blacksmith, and my son saw Rob Lyon, who's a blacksmith there on the left, and ran up to Rob, and like he let go of my hand, ran up to Rob, bear hugged Rob's legs, and told Rob that he loved him, wanted to be his friend, and wanted to be a blacksmith. And that man, Rob Lyons, was amazing. He spent over an hour, I think it was actually maybe about 2 hours, with my son, helping him in the forge. And you see right there, Rob's by the bits that would make mama freak out and think that her son was going to dive into the flames. And there, of course, is me hovering right behind my son, ready to grab him and snatch him away from utter doom. Will worked the bellows. Will told Rob what to do. Rob talked through all of what he was doing with my son, but my son felt like he was a part of that. Picture on the right was taken 3 years ago for my son's birthday present, and I had gotten him a class with that same gentleman as a surprise. And Will, my son, now loves blacksmithing. He's actually really gifted at it. And that love of that art, and that came out of somebody taking the time to show my son that he was valued. I spoke with my son a couple of nights ago about this and said, you know, what was it about blacksmithing that you liked? Was it the fire? Was it the danger? And he said, no, that when he saw that, that Reading Rainbow video, the man who was Rob Lyons, if anyone has a chance to look up that old Reading Rainbow video, highly recommend it, had looked kind. And my son noticed from that somebody looked kind. And then because that person was kind and did blacksmithing, my son correlated those two areas and figured that blacksmithing would have kind people, which is why he wanted to meet Rob, which is why he felt like he connected with Rob, which is why I was so grateful when Rob responded the way he did to my son. And now my son loves blacksmithing, but Will also gives back. He knows what it's like for people to not necessarily connect with him socially, and he's grown more appropriate in being able to do that. But he's also the one that will look out for the other kids, is kind of like a duck with the ducklings following. Will, with his friends, has a lot of friends who also have different sort of disabilities. Some are autistic, or some have autism, some have Asperger's. And we'll make sure that they're not only protected, he teaches them things that he knew he needed. So social skills and how to eat better and how to work out, because again, he realizes from that experience with Rob that being kind and learning something will help to transform somebody's life. And my son right now is 19 years old. He is a fantastic young man. He's a hard worker and he's kind, mainly because somebody took the time to connect with him and teach him something. If anyone would like the references, here they are in AMA style. And there is my email address, mem467@cornell.edu. I also have a SUNY email address, which is mmitchum, I think that is, at sunyacc.edu. But if you would like to have any questions answered, or if you'd like a copy of the outdoor cooking PDF, please feel free to email me and I'd be very, very happy to send that off to you. All right, so now at this point, I'm going to shut up. Is there anyone that has any questions or any thoughts or any concerns?
Hi, good job on this presentation today. I've been reading and seeing that there are some college campuses are starting programs where they also have like adult and senior living facilities on college campuses, and I think it is such a great idea going in both directions. Are you involved in anything like that in your work, or?
I am not, but I would love to be. One of the things that I've heard from doing this presentation and working with different groups is that there are usually two things that are surprising to people. One, that senior citizens in particular think that people who are of a younger generation will not value what they do and will not want to learn from them. And that is absolutely not the case. My son loves blacksmithing. Other people want to be able to learn to knit and crochet. So if something like that would be able to be possible where you'd have those generations together, I would absolutely 100% love it.
No, I think it's such a great concept. It would just bring so much value to everyone and purpose. So I hope that in this country we can go in that direction.
Absolutely. Thank you. Are there any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Like I said, you have my contact information. If anyone would like that, please do feel free to reach out, and I really appreciate your time and attending today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, MB. We haven't ever officially met, but we both teach biology. How are you?
Thank you. Like, I recognize that name.
That was great. Thank you so much. I really appreciated it.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
No problem. Have a great day. Thanks.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, MB.
Thanks.